Good afternoon. My name is Carolyn Hazel Drake, and I'm an artist at Waterstone Gallery. And I'm here to talk with Mini Giri, fellow artist at Waterstone Gallery, whose show, The Lotus Pond, is currently open for the month.
How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm really excited to hear about this show since I've only known you and your work for a few months now. The show is so spectacular, and I'm really excited to hear more about the context and history behind it.
So let me go right back to the beginning and talk about where the thought process for the show started. And I have for many years been very fond of the Indian traditional painting techniques. My mother is a artist who paints in the Tanjore style, which is from the south of India. And I've actually really been interested in the miniature painting traditions that got brought into India from the Persian school and kind of intermingled with a miniature painting tradition, a Rajasthani painting tradition that existed in India at the time. And what later developed was like a fusion of the two styles of painting. And while I was kind of dabbling with the initial thoughts about the show, I found myself really drawn to I'm just going to share two images here to better help explain. I got really drawn to the lotus ponds in a lot of the traditional miniature and Rajasthani paintings. And the lotus pond is something that the lotus flower as such has a lot of cultural and spiritual significance in South Asia. And all these paintings will have this little band at the bottom of the painting, which is almost like the foundation of the painting, if you think of it that way, where the rest of the image, which is normally like in story form or a narrative, is built on top of this foundation of the lotus pond. And that's something that I found really intriguing. And you find that there you go again. This it's a little bit muted on this one because it's faded. This is actually a 15th century painting. And the water here was done with silver leaf, which has kind of turned black now, but you still see it as this band at the bottom of the painting, kind of framing everything that then builds on top of it. And I started thinking of that in a more symbolic manner. I also have a personal connect with the lotus flower because my name, Mrinalini, in Sanskrit translates to lotus petal. And so the symbolism of the lotus was something that really intrigued me. And I also liked its form structurally. And on the other side here is a painting from the Pitchwai tradition, which is also out of Rajasthan. The Pitchwai paintings are the exact opposite of the miniature school tradition in the sense that they're huge. They were painted on fabric, and they were almost meant to be wallpaper style backdrops in temples or in palaces, whereas the miniature paintings are normally in a 9x12 or 9x11 format and meant as book art. They were illustrations in books. They weren't intended to be hung on the wall. But I love the compositional elements from the Pitchwai, and that was just this repeat of floral motifs stacked on top of each other. And that was really something that I started to play with in my imagery, where I used the idea of the water being this straight kind of line. So I built up that just geometrically, that line, and then use the form of a lotus petal as opposed to the entire flower. And I started working with this series kind of almost a year ago, just pre-pandemic. I think I started doing the first couple of concept sketches in January of 2020. Once the pandemic hit, I suddenly had this realization that if either of my parents were to get sick or something were to happen to them, I can't fly back home to them. And that just brought out this really deep feeling of homesickness that I've really never experienced before. I'm always able to fly back to India whenever I want to. And this was the first time that this distance became very profound, because there was no getting onto a flight and going home in 48 hours or whatever and seeing them. And the homesickness just brought out this longing for our house back in India. And when you look at the structure at the middle of this painting, it's called a jali in India, and a jali basically means a screen. And in India, we have screens on windows, and also through most of South Asia and the Arab world, and they date back to the Islamic traditions of having these very ornate carved windows and wooden screens that were basically meant to shield women from the rest of the household. But the tradition of the screen in India continues now, but mainly for security purposes. We have these kind of metal frames on our windows, and most of them are ornamental, and the ornamentation is normally, most of it is based on this kind of arabesque geometric pattern. And so I took that imagery and started incorporating it into the pieces that I was working through. So initially, I was actually just working with the lotus form and water and this idea of the lotus pond symbolizing a place of origin, and the lotus petal being myself, I guess, in a kind of abstract autobiographic kind of nature, and just kind of going through my experiences of pretty much living my whole life as an immigrant. I have been an immigrant my entire life, just in many different countries, and it's a strange feeling to always be in that immigrant position. I've lived in all these countries, but never have I been a citizen in those places.
It's interesting, when you compare this image that you've painted to the previous images that you showed that are much older, and how you've broken apart these aspects of the composition and you're kind of examining them separately. There is this feeling of internal reflection, or like self-assessment, trying to have a better understanding of these paintings by, and therefore your heritage, your identity, that tradition, by this close look at these individual elements.
I kind of wanted to distill portions of it. If you zoom, I can't really do it here, but when you look closely at the line work that is there on top of the lotus petal. Now I know that this kind of line work is something that I've been doing in my art for what's coming up onto almost a decade now. But if you then dive deep into a lot of the Jaipur Rajput tradition paintings, they had this kind of line patterning that they did to represent water or to represent the sky, or sometimes it was used as a filler to in fabric, whatever was drapery in the image. And it's just this very, and I find that when I look at these paintings, my eyes are naturally drawn to those kinds of details. And those were things that I then just wanted to distill and pull out, even though when you look at the image, those things tend to kind of disappear because you see the bigger image and you see the figurative aspects or the portraiture in it. And I found that many times the lotus pond is lost because it's tucked away down there in the bottom. And also the intricate line work and patterning gets lost. And those were things that actually I found the most interesting in these paintings. And I wanted to pull them out and put them into the limelight.
Feature them. Yeah, you know, that's wonderful.
So, I mean, those were the aspects that resonated for me with that work. And also the intensity of the color because of the use of natural pigments. And that's something that has always appealed to me. So in this series of work, I wanted to, here's a closer look at, again, the line work on the lotus petal that I was talking about. And here it's behind a screen, and I think you can just barely pick up a gold line edge of that frame. Of
so
the grill
fine,
happening. So that's something I actually really enjoy doing, even though it's really frustrating. It's just eventually you set into this mode of just enjoying the tiniest details that many times you might not even see unless you're holding the piece under a certain kind of light. Again, these pieces were meant to be held in the hand and looked at. They weren't originally designed to be hanging on a wall and viewed from a distance. It's with miniature painting, it's really a more intimate experience of you holding it in the hand and looking down at it and then kind of moving it in your hand.
So it catches the light.
It catches the light at different angles, and that's when more aspects of it will pop out at you. And that's how the artwork was originally designed to be experienced. Even though now we tend to frame things and put it on the wall, it's actually not a very Asian concept. We had more of a tendency to take these things out, look at them, admire them, and then pack them away again carefully.
I was just going to ask about your colors because they're so vivid. Wow.
So I got really interested in pigments maybe 5 years ago. I'm actually missing the exact timeline on that interest because I was going back and forth with it. But I've always been interested in really saturated color. And there were two things that I think, or two areas that I've strived for in my entire art practice. And one has been to get my lines finer and finer, and I wanted to get them thinner. And it was a constant quest of finding the tools that would help me make my line as fine as I possibly could. And the second thing that I wanted was saturation of color, or a purity of color. And I started with just researching different paint brands and trying to understand which brands were using more fillers in their paint. I mean, paint is basically pigment, an additive, and a binder that kind of makes it stick. And so there were brands that had richer pigment content, and so I started using those. And I realized that it's best to just have control of that myself. And that way I know exactly what's in the paint. And I know I control how it behaves to some extent, at least. And that's what really had me dive into this. And it's a bottomless hole. It's a bottomless. It really is. It's like Alice's rabbit hole. It's nothing is fixed over there. It's whatever works one time won't work another time. Different pigments, even if it's the same, like lapis lazuli, if you buy it from one supplier as opposed to another, it's going to behave differently. It's an adventure every time I mix up a batch of paint.
Yeah. So how do you make this into paint, the pigment?
So the paints that were used traditionally in the miniature painting tradition are essentially watercolor. Actually, I would say it's a gouache. It's a little bit, it's like a more opaque watercolor. And they are mixed with gum arabic, which is a tree sap. And that is basically the glue or the binder that adheres the pigment to your surface, the paper. They also used honey.
Oh, wow.
And sometimes you can use honey instead of gum arabic, and it has the same function. I use it with gum arabic. It gives the paint a really nice shine. It makes it a little bit more slick. And then a drop or two of clove oil, which kind of masks the smell of gum arabic. That's not very pleasant after a little bit of time. But the paint is archival.
Okay.
It's light fast. Once you make it, honey is a natural preservative.
Yeah.
And it's antimicrobial, and so nothing's going to happen to it. And I mean, these paintings have survived for 400 years, and they're still going strong. So I like that quality of it. I like the fact that I'm a little bit more aware of everything that's in there.
Yeah.
It's also so much more friendly on the environment.
Yeah.
There are no plastics, there are no additives, there are no tubes of paint. There's not everything that goes into the mass production of paints. And so this just felt earthy and real, and it just and it's fun. It's a lot of fun, as long as you're just really aware that every pigment behaves differently every time. There is no fixed formula. It's not like you can really say, 1 scoop of pigment to 2 drops of gum arabic. And I started off by doing a lot of research and listening to people, and they would have these fixed formulas, and then I would try and do it, and sometimes it stuck and sometimes it didn't. And so it's kind of like cooking. Where,
there's a recipe, but then there's how to cook.
If you've ever learned how to cook, especially in Asia, like my mom or grandmom or something, if I ask her for a recipe, all her proportions and quantities and ingredients are based on her hand, and she'll say, you take this much onion and you need about this much chili, and it's all like that. And I find the paint making process for me is also like that. So
do you make the paints in pretty small quantities then?
I prefer making them in smaller quantities. it's easier. Some of the pigments are extremely expensive.
Right.
Like lapis lazuli is one of the most expensive pigments.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost on par with gold in terms of its price.
Mm-hmm.
And so just to avoid wastage.
Yeah.
And what you find is it really spreads like a little bit
Ah.
a long way, especially once you've had that honey in there, and it all helps in its spreadability. I don't know, is that even a word? But it does. A small amount of paint does cover a large surface.
Yeah.
So what you see over there is like a tiny little scoop, and I probably did the entire set of paintings
Wow.
with that quantity. Wow. Then it's ground up in a muller. Traditionally, also in India, they used a mortar and a pestle. And then they are stored in fantastic seashells.
Oh, wonderful.
It's organic. It makes absolute sense to store your paints and seashells. I don't know why everyone doesn't do it. It takes so much plastic out of the entire environment, and it's a perfect palette. It's a reusable palette, as opposed to again using disposable palettes. And the paint dries, and every time, when you want to paint, you put in a couple of drops and mix it up, and they would just mix it in the shell with their finger, and that just reconstitutes it, because sometimes the gum arabic will separate from the pigment, and so you have to kind of just reconstitute the paint every time and get it to that perfect consistency. And so that's
what a gorgeous saturated palette of colors.
It is. The colors are intense, and I think that's the beauty of it. I don't know. It's just something that's always attracted me. There are certain pigments that are very traditional to the painting process, like the lapis lazuli and malachite, which is this beautiful pistachio green color. Then you have cinnabar, which is a deep, reddy orange color. There's turquoise, of course, that was very widely used, especially in the Arab Islamic schools. India, of course, is known for its reds and yellows, not just in pigment, but even in the country when you walk around. There's just bright red. I think it's a favorite color of all Indians. That's rose madder, and then we have what we also refer to as sindoor in India. It's actually a vermilion.
Okay.
And so that's that bright pop of red over there. The other common feature in the painting after the pigments is the gold. A gold and silver. I've used both, but over here it's...
So you mix that too then?
Yeah, so there are two ways that gold has been used in this series. There is a lot of gilding that is there, especially in all the straight strips of water. Those are gilded.
That makes sense.
And so that is gold leaf that is then stuck onto the paper with a gold size, it's called, which is like a glue. But all the kind of finer line work, like you saw the edging on the grill and the lines within the lotus petal, those are painted with gold paint. And the gold paint is made from the gold leaf. And this is quite an ancient technique. Again, it dates back to the early Persian miniature painting tradition like 15th century, I would say.
Wow.
And it's basically the gold leaf is dissolved in gum arabic.
Okay.
Or honey. Honey is also has been used. I used gum arabic. It just, I don't know. I just feel like it's probably, I just feel like it's going to stick better, but I'm sure honey works just as well. I haven't personally tried making it in honey, but they did use it. And
I'm noticing in this how saturated the red is, it's still transparent so that you're able to see the script that's on the paper. Can you talk a little bit about that paper?
Yeah, the paper is, let me just see if I have an image here of the paper. So that's a better view of the paper. The paper is approximately between 100 to 150 years old. And this is paper that I've sourced from Rajasthan. And it's old accounting paper, or it's old business ledger paper. So the script on it is kind of archaic Rajasthani. And it's income and expenditure statements, it's inventory lists, grocery lists. There are some entries that are of wage ledgers, so there are people's names and the number of hours they worked on a particular day, and that kind of information. So it's quite common in Rajasthan to find these old papers. It's not that difficult. There tends to be a habit of not throwing anything away in communities. And since these were business records and people held on to them, and also anything that was on paper at the time was considered valuable and would not have been disposed of, and people would have just held on to this for generations together.
And here in this one, I can see the tone on tone, the black fine lines that you were talking about in the earlier piece that are so subtle and beautiful.
Thank you. Those are, I went blind doing this. It's just, actually a play of light on those, because the base is painted in a black that is really matte, like a charcoal-based black color. And then the lines are done with a black that has a gloss.
Wow.
In it. Wow. So what you then get is just this play of matte against gloss, which is why when you look at this piece from a distance, you don't actually see the black lines. You will only see the gold lines, and you have to kind of move in closer and crank your head and look at it from an angle. And that's kind of when you become aware of the other lines. And it's kind of, I really think in weird kind of on a tangent and in abstract ways, but for me I was thinking of it as that's kind of what relationships are like. And I was again going back to this idea of always feeling like you're an outsider when you're in another country. And so the idea with that is that you're not really gonna get a sense of somebody or know a person unless you make that effort to go a little closer and view them under a different light. You're always only gonna see one aspect of a human being, and that inevitably is where a lot of the I feel misunderstandings sit today with immigrant communities, that there is a lack of involvement with the host community, and there is not enough understanding of someone's culture, or and many times there's misunderstanding that happens just because of how somebody speaks culturally. They may speak the language, but they won't necessarily know or understand the tonalities and the intonations. And someone might come across as rude, even though they have no intention of being rude. And that's kind of how these misunderstandings build up. And it's just because we don't understand their cultural context. We don't understand that in their language, that tone is normal.
Yeah.
And so those were kind of the thoughts that were in my mind when I was doing this black on black, because it's not black on white, it's black on black, really, at the end of the day. And you have to make that extra effort to see that difference.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And also, just rather than drawing the contrast of all of the obvious differences, like taking the time to look more closely to see subtleties on both sides.
So, so that was the thought process behind that. And I'll actually draw your attention to the image on the other side of the image with the blank paper, and you'll notice 3 little puncture marks.
Oh, yes, near the bottom.
And this is there in a lot of the paintings. And it's not that I was really careless and I started paintings while I was painting. This is part of their filing system.
Oh.
And so what they did is they had a string with a kind of a needle at one end, and they would just sew the sheets together, and that's how things were filed and kept. So you'd get a stack of paper with this string sewn through it, and and they're all in a long format, all the sheets of paper. They're not in what we are used to of the 9x12 kind of format. They're all like a 9x24, like they're in a narrow long format, and that's how they were sewn, and then they were folded in half. That's the line there.
Okay.
And then been tied up in cloth with another string, and that's how they were stored, and they would have been stored like that for hundreds of years. And so I didn't want to interfere with the integrity of the paper.
Yeah.
And the lines and the holes and the tears, they're all there. They're not hidden or masked.
I love that you preserve that, and it's also such a lovely contrast with the delicacy of your line work and your compositions, and also the precision, and then the valuable materials contrasted with this very like logistical kind of work a day, like record that was, paper was valuable, but also this was not being created for a precious purpose. And so to use that, to bring that forward is really wonderful.
Absolutely. This would have been the lowest quality paper at the time. The really good high quality paper, expensive paper would have been used for the painting or for entries in books. This would have been the lowest quality paper of the time. It's still handmade paper because all paper was handmade paper, but it's kind of like it's a little thicker than rice paper is the best way that I can describe it. I'm amazed that it's survived.
Yeah.
It was in fairly good quality. I didn't expect that. I was surprised considering how old it is, and also the fact that it just would have been wrapped up in cloth and lying in someone's house.
Do you know how old it is?
So I can't actually read the script, but I did take photographs and have it looked at by my dad and a couple other people who are able to read the script a little bit. And we found dates that correspond to approximately 1875.
Oh, wow.
1894 was another date that we picked up. I picked up 1905. So there's a range. So it's all approximately between 150 to 100 years old.
And then the elements that you're working with are, of course, much older even still, but then you're using them in this very contemporary fashion. So there's a real play with time happening also in your work.
Yeah, there is. And there was, I'm trying to remember who it was now. There was somebody who visited the gallery and said that, and they had seen a lot of the miniature paintings in museums around the world. And they said they were really confused looking at this because it looked like something that was ancient.
Yeah.
But it's obviously very contemporary in terms of its composition and the way the elements in it are handled. And it kind of caused this moment of confusion.
That's great, though. You're perplexed. That's like what you were just talking about slowing people down, so they're not able to jump to conclusions. That moment of being perplexed or that dissonance is really powerful.
That there was this kind of dichotomy in that, and I loved that. But when you think about it, the materials are really, really old.
Yeah.
So the paper is old. The pigments are of the time. It's the same materials. They're made in the same way, and so they're applied to the surface in the same way. I use the tools that would originally that I used. The paintbrush, for example, you can see the paintbrush there in the picture with the red lotus, and that paintbrush is specific to the miniature painting tradition. It's made from squirrel hair. It's handmade from squirrel hair, and it's, as you can see, it's kind of bent. It's not a straight, and it bends and it ends in just a couple of hairs. And that allows for that kind of line work and what they refer to as invisible shading, where you're constantly making tiny little marks on the paper that you can't see while you're doing them, but eventually it shows up.
Oh, wow.
So that kind of absolutely fine, minute work that the brush allows you to do. And because of the way it's bent, the brush has the ability to hold quite a substantial amount of paint or ink and disperse it slowly, which means you don't actually need to keep reloading your brush often. And that again,
that continuous fine line.
Smooth, continuous fine lines. And it takes a little bit of getting used to. It doesn't work like the regular brushes that we're used to. And it's a bit of a learning curve. It took me, I would say, like a month or a couple.
Oh, I thought you were going to say like a decade.
It took me almost a decade to find it because I was using regular brushes, and I just thought, oh, why is my line not getting finer?
Oh.
And this really is the tool.
That's wonderful.
This is, I would say, sometimes you need the tools to get the effect that you want. And it took me a couple of weeks of working with it every day for a few hours to get comfortable. But once you do get comfortable with it, that's it. You'll never go back.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, so that's what they would have used. On the other image, you see my display of burnishing tools. And I would joke and say burnishing is 70% of the work. Miniature painting. It's a workout. And it happens at every stage. It happens
Oh, wow.
while you prepare your paper, then it happens after each layer of paint, then it happens before you do the gold detail, then it happens after the application of gold to get a shine out of the gold. And it's really it is about just, it breaks down the, compresses the fibers in the paper initially, and that makes the surface really smooth. And then you're doing that at every level, so you're constantly getting a smoother and smoother surface to paint on, so that allows your the brush, that is those two tiny little strands of hair, to really glide smoothly. Otherwise it would pick up every bump on the paper.
Right.
To ensure that it's absolutely smooth. And what they actually did is they would put it onto a marble slab and then burnish it on top.
Oh, wow.
That's kind of the level of smoothness that you're aiming for. And then it also then kind of polishes up the gold in your.
And it's interesting because it makes the shapes look simultaneously like they're floating on the page, but also like they're completely part of the paper. And that is a very interesting visual effect of that technique.
It's very different from when you look at like contemporary gouache paintings or watercolor. Here, even though you're using those paints essentially, I think the levels of burnishing that happen do also kind of impart, also it brings out a shine in the colors. It gives the paint a sheen that wasn't there. Normally when you look at gouache, it has this kind of matte, it doesn't have a reflective quality. But with the repeated burnishing, that kind of brings a shine. And then when you're using pigments that are crystals or stones, they really glow once you do. That's what gives you that jewel tone quality that you see in these paintings and in the illuminated manuscripts and in those traditions. And they used an agate crystal, or a cowrie shell is what has been used to do this. There's actually a really interesting series of paintings at the Victoria, I think it's at the Victoria Albert Museum. I have to check my source. I don't know if I check the museum, but it's a series of 4 little paintings that are about the process of miniature painting. So it has one image where this guy is burnishing the paper, working really hard at it. And it has another image where somebody is making the gold. It has a third image of somebody doing the calligraphy, because calligraphy was a very important aspect of this, since these were book arts. And so these paintings are just really beautiful, and they are, for a change, they're paintings about the artist and not about the patron of the artist. And that, as a subject matter, it makes it really interesting to see as well, even from a kind of historic perspective, to get a look into what these ateliers were like, because these were large groups of artists and everybody would work at a different section. There would be one person that prepared the lapis lazuli, and somebody else that prepared other colors, one person in charge of gold. And so it was like this long line of craftsmen that were working together, but each of them being very specialized in one area. And here today, we're doing all of it. So I don't think we're ever going to be as skilled as they were.
Yeah, that's
so this is a piece that is in the painting, in the series, And this is just the water. This doesn't have the lotus symbols or the grill. And this is called Whirlpool. And I like, this is probably one of my favorites in the series. I like it for the color. And what I find is that the pigments that I have in the upper and the lower part are really, for me, they're colors that remind me of India. I have indigo and lapis and turquoise, and then there's the cinnabar and that bright Indian yellow, and sindoor, as what I said, or vermilion, and then the gold. And so this, for me, this piece really speaks to just the colors that I associate with.
Yes, these are quite different from the colors that you see in Portland.
A bit brighter, just a tiny
just a little bit.
But I think the biggest, I went back to India as an adult, and I think what really stayed with me was the colors and India's love for color. It is really over the top. There's nothing like it, and that is something that I think I'm constantly trying to bring back, even in the work that is monochrome. There are pieces that are just only in indigo, but then I want that depth in that color.
Yeah.
So that's a whole lot. So if you have any questions or...
I mean, I think, I've had the good fortune of seeing this show in person, and even with these incredible photographs, it just really isn't the same. Like you were saying, being able to move at an angle and see the light catch all of the metallics that are used. And I guess I'm curious, now that you've seen the show up, and you've had a chance to step back a little bit from being so close to the paper while you were painting, was there any kind of new learning for you, or any discovery in seeing the show installed?
Yeah, I think one does get really myopic when you're working on a series and you're just constantly looking at it, and you don't actually get a perspective of the show until it's up and it's hanging in the gallery. And I found that once it was up there, I was observing them from a distance, and I always had this fear that it wouldn't read from a distance. And I think normally with abstract and with contemporary art and in the Western art culture, we're so used to this idea that it has to be big, and it's always about how large are you gonna go with your artwork, and biggest impact. And I was terrified that once it's finally up, it's all going to feel like it's not big enough and it doesn't have that impact from a distance. And I was so pleasantly surprised by that, because it does resonate from a distance. It does from a distance. The colors are so intense that you can stand across the room and the colors jump out. And that is something that really surprised me as well, because I didn't expect that. That was a learning for me. And
I mean, even beyond like grabbing you from across the room, even from across the street through the window, the color, just that glimmer. And also, you were just saying about how these are the colors of India. And so it does really, in our gray skies, they just sing right out of the glass onto the street. Yeah.
It does. The minute the sunlight hits it, it's just glows. And so there is a vibrancy and a luminosity in the colors that I was really surprised. I was hoping for it while work. That was the intention, but I couldn't really. I mean, I don't have gallery lights in my studio,
right.
And so much of it contributes, and there is no visual distraction in a studio, in a gallery, but in my studio, there's so much visual clutter that
Right.
I was just hoping that the paintings would do what they're doing right now, and so I was thrilled. There was a lady that came in yesterday and to look at the work, and she was trying to figure which one she wanted, and she wasn't sure because she liked 2 or 3 of them, and I always felt that, and she was standing and looking at them from a distance, and I was telling her to go closer in, and she's like, no, but look how bright the colors are from back here. And I said, right, yes, they are. So yeah, that was a pleasant surprise.
Well, thank you so much for taking us on this deep dive into your process and the whole tradition that your process is associated with. We are so thrilled to have this show up at Waterstone, all of us members of the gallery. We're so excited to see it. And we encourage all of you who are watching from home to come down Friday, Saturday, and Sunday between 11 and 4, or gladly by appointment anytime else during the week. Any closing thoughts from you, Minnie?
No, I'm just, I'm there every Friday. So I'm quite happy to chat with anyone that wants to come join me on a Friday or any other day for that matter. It's a beautiful space, the gallery. I'm so thrilled to be a part of it. And yeah, it'll just be nice to see the Pearl coming back to what it was a year ago. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. So
years, so
please come down and visit us this spring now that we have good weather. We would love to see you in the gallery.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.